What happens when you've outgrown the classroom? Not because you're burned out, but because you're ready for something more. In this episode, I'm talking with Tommy Messenger, a former educator who followed his curiosity and built a career in instructional design without taking the traditional path everyone talks about. We dive into the moment he knew it was time for a new chapter, how he navigated the uncertainty of transitioning out, the skills that help him shine in instructional design, and why wanting a different kind of impact is completely valid. And what's truly incredible about Tommy is that he didn't stop there. He turned around and created research-backed, crowd-tested workshops and courses to help other educators transition with clarity and confidence. From his transition academies to his free course and free community, he is building real support for teachers exploring their next chapter. If you've ever wondered whether you're allowed to want more or whether you too can break into instructional design without following a cookie-cutter path, this conversation will give you so much clarity. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite beverage, and maybe grab a friend. And as always, let's get ready to dive into my interview with Tommy Messenger. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leena Marie Saleh, the EdTech Guru. I want to thank you so much for spending time with me on this journey, for all the support that you give me, and for following along. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and let's get ready to do this. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We have another episode of the Transitioned Educator series, and today we are joined by Tommy Messenger. Tommy, how are you doing today?
Great. Yeah, it's a good day today, and so happy to have the conversation.
Yeah, really excited to have you on. We always like to kick off these conversations just learning a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I spent 10 years in education. I was a middle school, high school history teacher. And then at the tail end of that, I stepped into administration, and I actually really enjoyed that. But it was a small charter school in San Diego, mostly refugees and immigrants from just all around the world. So it was an amazing place to work, super diverse. I loved it, but just really felt in 2020, kind of felt like I was ready for whatever was next. And like was ready for that transition. Realizing I loved the kids and like the schools that was really amazing, supportive. But it was kind of more just like wanting to be more at home with my young family. And then also just kind of having this like entrepreneurial mindset and just like wanting to step into what's next. And so, I made the transition all the way up to like I stepped out of the classroom, out of schools in June 2023. So it was a little bit of I took a long route to getting where I am.
So did you just say that you started to think about the transition in 2020 and then you finally made the transition into 2023? Yeah, I think, and I'm anxious to hear your story, obviously, of like how you initially made that leap. We haven't had a lot of people come on that have kind of stepped into that administrative role. There's been a few people, but not that many. I think sometimes, I'm sure you could probably speak to this too, but it's not that you don't love the work that you're doing. You're just ready for more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
okay. Oh, so go ahead.
No, go. I thought just go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Whatever you were going to say. Sorry.
What was I going to say? No, and I was pretty burnt out when I stepped out of the classroom into administration. But that last year when I was an administrator, it allowed me to kind of just take it, like, I just felt like it was a fresh breath of air and really helped me see like, all right, like I really do love this and I love these kids and I love what this school is about. But I still had the clarity to transition out.
Yeah, I think oftentimes educators think that they have to have like these really bad experiences or something really bad has to happen. But I think sometimes it's just that you just want something else and you want to stretch your wings in new ways that are outside of that. Since you said you started thinking about it in 2020 and then you finally made the transition in 2023, that's a longer process than I think most people tend to take, but it's not uncommon in today's world for it to take a little bit longer. So what sort of steps did you take to make yourself have more success post transition?
Yeah, I think it was a longer process, and partly that was like I chose it to be longer, but then also the nature of like transitioning, like you don't get to choose when you get that job. But so some of it was realizing like in 2020, I mean, I worked from home for like a year and a half ish, and I was like really like this remote working and like want to be around my family a bit more. And so I started just kind of like looking and just thinking about it and landed on instructional design actually Christmas 2021. Like I got COVID. And so I was like quarantined in like a room for my daughter's first Christmas. But then I just used the time to figure out like, what do I want to do? And so like, I think the first step I did, like, I think so too often people are rushing to like what you're going to do. And like the first step I really want to do is like slow down and figure out like why, like what's my why? Like what drives me? What's my passion? Because I think there's a difference between like just leaving something. Like I'm just trying to get out of education. I'm trying to leave the classroom versus like you have clarity and purpose to you're going towards something. And it seems like such a subtle like difference, but I think it's pretty massive in the way you talk about your experience and you have purpose and clarity walking into interviews and whatever it may be. And so I took a longer time period because I actually originally was going to go into UX design. I was like, all right, I
Oh,
really like this. I went to those like Google certificates, and then I was like, okay, let me try it. And so then I kind of just before I made the jump wanted to figure out like what did I like this? Like, was I passionate about this? And so I took a bit of time to kind of figure that out and like what drove me. And so when I landed on instructional design, it kind of felt like the perfect balance between my experience in education and understand how people learn, and also kind of this UX design of like bringing good experiences to people. And so that's when I kind of like 2021, I was like, all right, let me double down on this and kind of like upskilled to kind of make that happen.
yeah, I think it's a great strategy to have. I think a lot of times what you're saying is like, it's that I have to get out. But I think no matter where you are in any step of your journey, even if you're me and looking to transition to something new, you really need to understand where you're going and why you're going, because you can be really caught up in fluff and you can just get really confused. And a lot of teachers get burnt out. I talked to an educator
Yeah.
just the other day and she said, she was getting a ton of interviews, but she couldn't remember which interview was what and when and how, and then how to apply the use cases that she needed to have a
Yeah.
really successful transition. So while she was getting a lot of interviews and her resume was doing just the job that it needed to, she wasn't really necessarily getting to that next round because she didn't have the right skills to speak to actually get to those next rounds. So I think those are all really important things, is really taking a really good, I call it like auditing your life, like making sure you understand where you're going.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned, you really thought you wanted to go into UX. And so you took what I like to call no thank you taste of something and took,
Yeah.
this Google certification. Sometimes people pay for it, sometimes they don't. But I think being able to take this class and put yourself in a scenario where you want to try it is really important, because I think sometimes we just like, I want to do instructional design. And I've talked to a lot of people who made the transition to instructional design, and it's lonely sometimes. It's kind of like
Hmm.
isolating. Sometimes you're working with a lot of like different stakeholders, but the bulk of the work that you do is alone. And sometimes that's really hard for people to understand that you go from this classroom or
Yeah.
administrative environment where people are on you 24/7, and then you go to ID and it's just you thinking and you bringing the ideas and really creating that creative design. So I think what you said is really valuable, is just really understanding what you want, your why, and where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think I see this a lot where people are kind of like, I'm open to instructional design, or I'm open to client success, or I'm open to project manager. And like, I don't have the perfect analogy for it, but it's like saying, hey, I'm open to nursing, or I'm open to be an x-ray technician, maybe a doctor. And it's like all those, and then people get frustrated because like, well, why do I have to have a different resume for all these jobs? And the reality is, like, because they require different skills, like the way you talk
Mhm,
about it. And I think that factors into like, are you going towards something, or are you just trying to leave something? And
mhm.
like, I think there's this fear, and I felt it like when I doubled down and said like instructional design is what I'm going towards. Like, you're closing every other door, and that's kind of, that could be like scary. But I think the reality is like when you close all the other doors, like that door becomes bigger because you walk through it with like a more powerful story. Like, I was able to double down, and then I did invest in myself in terms of like upskilling in an academy. But because I had the clarity of like this is what I want to do, and like I doubled down and said, all right, like let me build off of the foundational skills I already have in the classroom, and really to kind of make that transition.
Yeah, I think doubling down on yourself is also just important aspect,
Yeah.
because I did a lot of upskilling too. I think no matter whether it's a paid course, it's a free course, it's
Yeah.
whatever, there is a certain amount of upskilling that is important in that aspect. And I like what you said about the resume, and that is what it looks like when we look at people on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, I want to do sales and I want to do
Yeah.
event planning and I want to do open heart surgery. Like, it's all like the same thing of saying like, I don't know. It basically says, I don't know what I want to do, but I think all
Hmm.
of these things are something I could be interested in. And you do
Yeah.
need to apply your skills and skill sets, be really clear. And I haven't heard anyone mention that before, but it's like you're shutting the doors to other opportunities, or what you think is the case, and that can
Hmm.
be scary. So I think that's a good perspective that I don't think we've talked about too much, or I haven't talked about with other people, about like that feeling of like, if I close the door, will I be able to open it back up?
Which, yeah, I think is a fear, just like niching down and focusing. But like you said, it's just more powerful. Like, your story comes across like with clarity, and like that comes across in interviews, like the way you talk about yourself. Like, I do think there's like, as an educator, you have foundational skills for a lot of things, which is why
Mhm.
I think educators can say like, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, because you've done a lot. But then you have the foundations for a lot of things, but then you have to then build off that foundation for like that specific pathway or whatever you want to do. And then even understanding that like in instructional design, there's like you could be an e-learning developer, so you're creating e-courses. You can be an LMS administrator where you're just kind of like managing learners in a platform. And so like there's niches within niches. But like picking that pathway, I think is huge because it allows you then to kind of focus in on like, but like again, I would say like take the time before you pick that pathway to kind of practice, do what a couple things, see if you like it. And then from there, like when you do pick that, like double down on it and focus on it. And then you can sprint a bit faster once you do that.
Yeah, and I think it just makes everything easier when you know the direction in which you're going. You can always have an oh shit moment where like, oh shit, this isn't actually where I want to go. And you
Yeah.
can change your mind, which I think is okay. But really having just one clear pathway is going to it's going to pay off dividends for you in the long run. While you can transition to something else much easier once you made your first leap. It's really important for you to have those skills and to be able to tell them in the
Yeah.
right way. Because a lot of times when I speak with educators, they're like, well, I only planned events for 30 kids. And it's like, well, it actually didn't. Did you plan it for the whole, like, for the whole grade level? Did you contribute to your school's things? Did you control the budgeting? Did you control all the things?
Yeah.
And they're like, they really underplay, I think, the skills that we do have because as educators, we don't celebrate all those skills necessarily.
Yeah.
It's just, you just do it. That's just what it is. So I think it's just really identifying and nailing that down. And then when you do have those interviews or when you go full fledged in one direction, then you can really call on those skills and the things that
Hmm.
you've learned. And that's why upskilling is so important, I think, because it puts you, as educators, we only know educators speak. And so we
Yeah.
have to know others speak. Clarity, like those are not words that we typically use in the
Yeah.
classroom.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it really brings a lot of clarity to what you're doing. But in the business world, it's a term that you use very, very often. So it's just like putting those different terms that we would necessarily not normally use into a space that makes sense for other people who are not educators, but maybe educating others.
Yeah, and I think the idea of transferable skills, I think, is like a really important one because, and I think it brings a lot of frustration to educators, and it brought a lot of frustration to me because I had the mindset like I just feel like I gave my whole career to like helping others, and like where's my ticket? Like where's the person who's gonna take a chance on me? And I remember just reading something because I got in this mindset like, give me the job and I'll show you I can do it. I knew I could do it. Like I just had this belief in myself I could do the job, and I read something who was like it's not the hiring manager's job to take a risk on you so you can show that you can do the job. It's like your job up front to prove you can do the job before you get the job. And so that's why like I think doubling down and choosing your niche allows you then to build out those like projects and those examples because if like teachers have a lot of transferable skills, but I would say like you have the foundation for a lot of things. It's almost like the analogy like each one of those skills is like a Lego block and you've been building like this contraption, this beautiful thing in your classroom, like using different pieces and now you're going to a new place with like taking blocks with you, but there's also new blocks there. And they may be a block in this new place, maybe similar to the one you used before, but it's kind of different. And so the reality is like, yes, these skills transfer, but they also look different in this new role in industry. And I think if you only give examples like of how you use your skills in the classroom, you're not showing how the skills transfer. And I think it's your job as like the educator to show how those skills transfer and not just like why don't hiring managers see this or like why don't do they not understand? And I think just kind of like yelling it louder on LinkedIn isn't going to get the point across. But like I just would say like doubling down and really showing like these skills transfer, building up projects. And you brought up that event planning, like then maybe you go to your principal and say like, can I plan an event for the school? And like you build a case study out, and so now you have this and that's done in your school. But you track the budget, like you talk about stakeholders, like and that is a project. You're building off what you did in the classroom, and you know how this like kind of level up, and it could be a project that's real, or it could be like a hypothetical case study. But I would say like I say that's a huge thing, and I think it's a huge misconception of like yes, your skills transfer, but like we say all the time, like don't tell me, like show me to students, right? Like when they're writing, I think it's the same thing when it comes to like the job transition.
Yeah. And I mean, I see that with like even, I think other people outside of education, like they don't really understand that like when they transition to like a new career that you really have to tell the story. And it has nothing to do with you being a teacher and only touching 30 students, but it's just this whole skill set of tools that you use to get there. And specifically in like ed tech, we're really, that's where the place where most teachers end up wanting to transition to or some kind of like technical, obviously tech is where we go. But
Mm.
it's really important to be able to tell the whole story. So like if you're launching something or you're delivering trainings, right? You're not just delivering trainings. You've built an
Yeah.
entire system to deliver the trainings. Then during it, you have some sort of feedback. You have some sort of like ongoing assessment that's really important. And then if you have failure, what do you do to go back to like help with that failure? Because even as ourselves in the instructional design space, we're still looking at feedback. We're still trying to understand where users are. Are they really gaining any information from this? Are they having success? Do they like it? Are they enjoying it?
Yeah.
We're constantly iterating and using those same tools that you use in the classroom. You have to be able to tell it. And those are your stakeholders. Those are your pieces of delivery content. You built all of those things. It's just about telling that story in a way that's meaningful to other people, because a hiring manager doesn't know what a teacher does. They'll never know
Yeah.
because they don't know. Just like when you're posting on LinkedIn, why doesn't anyone understand what a teacher does? Because they don't know. They have no idea all the hats and all the things that you wear. So you have to make sure that you tell it in a way that translates to anybody, can pick it up and be like, oh my gosh, you've done so many incredible things, and I can see how you've translated it in this way.
And I think a piece of that is like you mentioned before, using the language of the new industry to like talk about your experience. So I think there's value in that. Like, so rather than like maybe students use the word learner, or rather than, lesson plans, you use storyboard. I think if you just stop there, like you're doing yourself a disservice, and like really showing. So like one thing I did was when I was an administrator, I went to my principal, was like, hey, can I plan a professional development for the staff? And like I did this parent panel, like I said, we had a lot of refugees and immigrants, so a lot of different languages and different cultures. So like I brought in parents to talk about their culture and how their culture like views education and how you can build that collaboration. And I like got teachers' views before and then got teachers' views afterwards, kind of tracked the whole thing, like what I would do differently. But I think there's really value, especially if you're in a school, like could you pick up a project like that for whatever industry you're interested in? And that's a way to like build a real case study, real project. And then you can get like real testimonials. You can get your principal, like his or her thoughts on it, right? Other teachers' thoughts on it. Like you can really build something out, whatever that may be, like project management, client success. It could be, a variety of things. But I think really having that experience, and it goes back to like, but you only can do that when you actually pick a lane, because you can't build out projects for event planning and then client success and sales. Like, so you have to kind of pick something first and then, build really your showcase where you're showcasing your skills.
Exactly. And I will say you can do that. It would be a detriment to yourself to build it out for sales and events and whatever. The reason why we say that is because it will burn you out. These case
Yeah.
studies and these
Yeah.
representations of building a portfolio is very time consuming. And if you did one for sales, and then you did one for events, and then you did one for client success, and you did one for everything that you were interested in, you're going to be burned out before you even get started. So being able to translate it in that way. And I just say that like lightly, like because burnout is a really real thing. You feel it in the classroom, but you'll feel it in the job hunting process too. No matter how good you are at the job hunting process, it is taxing on everybody. So it's really important that you are really translating and picking that niche. It really is just going to lend itself to you feeling better about what you're doing, and feeling more confident stepping in rather than kind of teeter-tottering in two lanes. And it will just be felt everywhere that you're
Yeah.
doing that process.
And you mentioned before, and sorry.
No, you go first.
You mentioned before, and I think you said and I watched one of your other videos as well. Like, it's important. I think we think of a portfolio as like the final project of like the beautiful thing, but it's a lot of it is like also grabbing like and showcasing like your thought process. Like, how'd you iterate and like, okay, I thought this first and I went here, because that's just as valuable as like this polished, pretty thing. Like, I would say like, because really anyone can kind of make a polished, pretty thing, but it's like the thought behind it and showing, and which could be scary, right? It takes vulnerability to say like, here's where I made a mistake. And like, we don't want to, we're trying to get a job. We're not trying to like share where we messed up. But I think that's powerful because like, yeah, like hiring someone, you could teach them any amount of skills, but you can't teach this idea of like go getting and vulnerability and like, just like iteration, like being able to receive feedback. Those are kind of like just character traits that like, I think you can demonstrate in that process as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think that people necessarily think that. I think they only see this like polished piece of work and they think, well, that's all they're going to see about me. But what I'm looking for, and I don't know if other people do this, but I look to see like, okay, that's cool. It's really great that you did this, but like, what are your learnings? What
Yeah.
things did you run into? What obstacles did you face? Because the thing is exactly what you said. We can teach as many skills as we want, but if somebody cannot learn when they fall down or learn from feedback, because there's a ton of feedback in ID, there's a ton of feedback in general in the world. Like in education, I don't think you get as much feedback. You do from students and from parents, but but you don't really get as much feedback as you do, I think, in the world outside of the classroom. People are they're going to be very quick to tell you your wins. And then they're also going to pull you aside and let you know your losses and,
Yeah.
and have those conversations of how can we move and how can we have more success together because they made an investment in you. And so they want you to have growth too. And so showing that growth, whether it's good or bad, because we've all fallen, there's always been professional development that you're like, that is so horrible. I will never do that again. And that's okay
Exactly.
because that makes your next one even more meaningful, engaging, impactful, and everything that you go from there just gets better. Okay, so you talked about going into the UX, kind of exploring that, taking a little bit of a no thank you taste. I think that probably made you I would guess, a better instructional designer. But outside of just taking that certification and that sort of thing, are there any other steps or anything else that you did to kind of help you solidify that move forward?
Yeah. So the first piece, and so when I left the education in 2023, I actually stepped into freelancing for about a year. So I ran my own business. But like to get to there is I paid for two things once I was sure, like I worked with a resume writer and some of that, like if you're willing, like if I was willing to pay $1 for something, I like want to do my research and make sure it was like legit. And so you got to do your research. If you're going to pay for anything in your transition, like you got to do your research, like vet the person, talk to like references and yeah, is it worth you paying for it? Right. That's your hard earned money. And so that was huge for me because I had a good resume and there's tons of free resources out there that like when I spoke to the person, like, hey, your resume is about 85%, like it's pretty good, but I can bring it up to like 95, 100. And that margin is like, is big. And also I just wanted the validation because I wasn't getting a lot of call. Like I probably applied to hundreds, 500, 600 jobs with like getting the classic like email that, like was a gut punch every time or like
Yep.
no response. And I wanted like when I was getting those, I was like, hey, I think it's easy for me to kind of point at the process like, oh, they just don't understand teachers or they don't understand what I can bring. But I had to kind of point the finger at myself and say, okay, what can I improve? And so first for that was like my resume, how I'm going to tell my story. And then also I joined like an academy for instructional design. And that was big for me because there were just concepts and ideas I needed to learn to kind of like bring my experience over to this industry, but also like to build a portfolio. I like wanted that expertise from like the experts to kind of validate that. And so, and then when I've been getting a couple freelance jobs with my portfolio piece. Then when I had a job offer in 2023 and I just decided, but I had I had enough freelance jobs to kind of ride out. So I talked to my wife, I was like, all right, should I just do this? And like turned down the job offer and just went for it and did that for about a year. But there's a lot of like I said, doing kind of iterating and using like, it's easy to like point the finger to like, I'm not getting these jobs, like, the issues with them, but like kind of look at myself and say like, using even the silence as feedback of like, hey, I need to change something. Like if I think I'm the world's best employee and they're just not seeing it, then obviously I'm not telling my story correctly. Right. And so I need to like present myself in a way that gets me seen. And so, yeah, a lot of iteration, a lot of like just consuming free YouTube content. I mean, that's the amazing thing about YouTube, but also like a big step for me, and I know this might not be for everyone, was like doubling down and like paying for an academy that really could help me upskill. Cause I just thought like, okay, I could get there eventually, and I did take a slower route, but it'll help me get there faster. And I really like, that's what helped me land a bunch of freelance jobs was having that strong portfolio, which then my freelance jobs led me to land my full-time job I'm at now. So yes, life's not linear and neither is a job transition.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. I think that everybody's journey is always uniquely their own. I don't think that it has to have two things don't have to look the same to
Yeah.
kind of get there. But I think there is that process of finding your niche, making sure your resume is dialed in the way that it should be, and then upskilling in some manner, which I think are all
Yeah.
really, really important. Whether that's taking on project, it doesn't have to necessarily be academies. It could be, although there are some really great academies, I make sure that you vet them exactly.
Yeah.
There are some not so good ones, but there are a ton of really, really great ones. And that's the way that you upskill. Sometimes if you're going to social media or something, it just be something simple like going to your school and saying like, hey, I want to run the social media this year. I want to do ABC and then show the growth that way. There's lots of different ways that you could do projects and things by upskilling in new ways.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to consume some sort of learning in some capacity, whether that's YouTube, whether that's whatever makes sense for you and whatever you think is going to be the most strategic. I've had a lot of people go back to school and get their master's for instructional
Yeah.
design. And I have many people not do that. And then some people take academies. So it all looks different for everyone. And I think it depends on where you are and what you feel like is going to be the most comfortable for you. and whatever that pathway is that takes you to get there. And what I like about your story also is that, you know, however long it takes someone to transition is however long it takes them to transition. I think it's uniquely their own. You have a family. It's not like you can just take like really risky moves. Or you have to be really
Not
cautious
anymore.
about
Yeah.
the moves that you're making. If you're just young and single and alone, you probably can take less risk. But there's a lot of things that come with that. House, mortgage, all those other like kinds of things
Yeah.
that we have to think about when making those transitions. But I think a really underlooked piece is the freelancing. If you can swing it and you have a way to do it, freelancing can really be some of the best ways to get your next job or to find that
Yeah.
like next thing. But because you can try a bunch of things short term, sometimes they're long term, but they're bringing you in because you're an expert. And I also think it levels up your confidence in a way that might not be able to if you just immediately made a jump.
Yeah. No, it was huge. And yeah, like, and that started with like the first job I took on was for a former principal of mine. And so like it started
Ooh.
with like that. And then I was able to build kind of a case study again with their permission. Like whenever you build a portfolio, you want the permission that you can use those ideas and concepts. And then use like, for me, it was like baby steps. It wasn't just like I got all those jobs like right off the bat. Like it was little things and that I just chose to do throughout that.
Yeah. And I would say don't turn those opportunities down if they come to you and you're not sure like how to handle that or how to handle the funding, the money, that sort of a thing. I think networking is really, really important piece. And you could lean on someone and be like, hey, I know that you're freelanced. What does that usually look for you? Or there's a ton of Reddit groups. So you could just find information and kind of
Yeah.
shoot from the hip from there and kind of go from there. And if it works, then it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I think I've had a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues that have had great success from freelancing, but it's a building. So like it's not just
Mhm.
like you turn in your resume, you stop working, and you just get immediate freelance jobs. It's the building over time that
Yeah.
you get, and it's word of mouth and recommendation. Those types of things that kind of come with it. So, but don't turn those opportunities down when they come to you.
Yeah. And I think with that, like the opportunity may look different than what you think it may be, but like just that small thing, it could just be a really like, again, it might just start with a project outside your classroom, but in your school. And then it might start
Mhm.
from there, like what's the next step up from that? So it's not going to be like a 8-month freelance gig right off the bat, but like you can get creative and some like maybe you create like a hypothetical case study where you walk through the process and like you demonstrate, you use the skill, whatever tools. Again, a lot of times these industries have different tools, whether you're using like a Figma or articulate storyline or whatever it may be. So like use that tool in the hypothetical case study, but you can even build those out yourself. And that's I actually did do that, which got me kind of my full freelance e-learning freelance job, and so was off like a hypothetical case study.
Yeah, it's just about how you tell the story and how you translate it, and you could take those tools and just think about like there's never any shortness of volunteer opportunities, and I think volunteer opportunities actually lend itself.
Hmm.
You're already there, you're already in the setting. For me, I was a foundation, I don't know, like the chapter lead, I guess, for like a scholarship foundation. And so I was able to like lean into that and use that to like translate the skills. And it was just volunteer based. I did some things in the school too, but then they thought it was the place that I was in would have thought it was
Yeah.
really strange if I was all of a sudden taking on a lot of extra big things. So there are a lot of volunteer organizations that you can do stuff, a lot of nonprofits, things that you can volunteer to. If you don't feel like that's something that can happen for you,
Hmm.
there's always a ton of like nonprofits, even on LinkedIn, that are always like looking for people to volunteer. So take that opportunity. I know you're thinking like, oh, I should get paid, but you have to take a step back to take a step forward. That's always the way it
Yeah.
works.
100%.
Okay, so tell us a little bit now about what your career, you did the freelancing and that sort of thing. So tell us a little bit about what life is like as an ID and what are some of the things
Yeah.
that you do, maybe some tools that you deal with, and just kind of what a life looks like to be an instructional designer for you.
Yeah. So I'm currently a senior instructional designer at UC San Diego Health. And so I just tell people I create training for the hospital. So I work with like nursing groups or physician groups or just whatever it may be to create mostly e-learning, but it's also like in-person instruction type stuff. And so a lot of it is like, and I work hybrid. So it's 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. And yeah, a lot of it is just you're fixing a problem, right? So like learning is just a tool to fix a problem. So like there's a behavior that's either happening that you don't want to happen, or there's a behavior that's not happening that you want to have happen. And like learning can help fix that depending on the problem, right? And so a lot of times it's meeting with these groups and healthcare, like learning is so outdated. My wife's a RN, and so like I've seen I saw a lot of the e-learning stuff before I got hired. I was like, I mean, stuff looked like it was Windows 90, like 95 or whatever. And so it's very antiquated. And where I work is, also in education. So education, healthcare is like very two antiquated industries. But
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of it has been just like helping these different groups understand like we can approach learning a different way. And it's great. Like, so I really enjoy it and enjoy what I do. Because again, I just look at like I'm solving problems and I like making things better. And that's kind of goes back to like my why. Like I realized like I just like looking at a problem, trying to make it better, trying to like look at it from all angles and fix it. And I was like, I feel like I can do that in this industry. And so like that's what I like doing. And then there's parts of it where like I'll manage the LMS or, like learners getting into the platform. But, that's some of the role as well. So there's not everything about your new job isn't what you love, right? Like no job's perfect.
Yep.
But so that's kind of what a little bit my day to day looks like.
And then what are some of the tools that you find yourself using? Because I know that healthcare can be a little bit different. Some places use Articulate. We don't. Obviously, I work at Canva, so we use Canva.
Yeah.
So, it just depends on what you're, where you're at. But I love to hear the other tools that other organizations are using.
Yeah. So I'm going to start right there. I use Canva a lot. I probably use it every day. So my hat off to you. So I use Canva for like design stuff. And then I use Articulate 360. So like whether it's Storyline or Rise to build like actual e-learning. So that's like our main tool. And then for like video I've used a lot of different platforms for video, but we use Camtasia for
Mhm.
like video design. And so those are probably like the three tools I use most. But then also like then use all the other stuff like PowerPoint or Word or all those, other platforms. But I would say those are the main tools I use.
I think that's good because a lot of people ask me if they think it's worth paying for Articulate or what sorts of tools should they be using. So I think it's always nice to ask each
Yeah.
instructional designer what sorts of tools they're using because in every single role you use different tools. Like that's just the
Yeah.
truth. It's kind of like teaching, right? Like you go from one district to the next and it's a different district that has different tools that all do the same thing. So I think it's good to just kind of have that in your background.
Yeah.
I also appreciate that you mentioned that you're creating training, solving those problems, but then there's also parts of your job, like any other job that we do that are just like those administrative type tasks that just kind of come with the role, but are important to do it. So some of your day is spent doing the things that you absolutely love. And sometimes it's just spent doing like management of other tasks and things like that. Because you work in healthcare and your background is not in healthcare, can you share a little bit about what that is like when you're creating trainings,
hmm
since that isn't your necessarily your forte?
Yeah, no, and that's like that means my brain hurts a lot of times leaving these meetings because there's like so much information I don't understand. But I think I learned a lot of that like when I freelance. So I did a lot of freelancing for like FDA compliance. I did some freelancing for like pharmaceutical software companies, like with
Perfect.
coding different things, like and I also did some stuff for like airline stuff. And again, I'm no expert in any of those things. And so I think like an instructional designer, you can think like, hey, I'm not an expert in anything, but you are an expert like in how people learn. And so like that's what I always tell people, like you're an expert in, MRI technician information, but I'm the expert in learning. And so I'm going to I like to say, I download your brain, I download your information, and then I then organize it in a way that's going to make sense to the learner. And I think one of the things, like so you do have to learn, like I've had to learn things about healthcare just because you want to know your industry that you're working in, right? And that's just always going to help you, whether it's acronyms or ideas or just how things are structured. But also because I don't know things, like I ask a lot of questions. And so that's part of a great instructional designer. Like I always just like, and sometimes I'll clarify things. Like I remember asking the other day, like, okay, so what's that process? I'm like, oh, well, we don't actually have that process. Okay, let's figure out what that process is. And so like, I don't come into it with assumptions because I have none coming into it. And so I think that's what I say. Like I'm the expert in how people learn and how to make learning that sticks with people. And it is important to learn your industry, but I wouldn't say like if you're getting into instructional design, you have to tie yourself to a specific industry when you're applying. Like you can just it does help to have like a lot of like, as I did freelancing, I started realizing like 80% of my projects were healthcare oriented. And so that helped me, I think, like when I do think that played a factor because a lot of my case studies and the experience was around healthcare. So then it just made sense to jump into healthcare. And I think it was like less of a risk for my hiring manager because they saw like, okay, you can create training that is compliance oriented, because it is also different, like creating training that like follows like very strict compliance, that like you get audited. And so like that's different than creating training that may be like, all right, let's learn how to give feedback or like soft skills. Like those are two different things. And so it does help to understand the industry you're walking into.
Yeah. I think there's always a certain level of learning. I think a lot of times we think that when we move to a new place or a new industry or that sort of thing, even if you're teaching third grade every year, a new program comes in, a new something comes in. So you're always having to what we call upskill. You're always having to upskill and learn new things. And so I think that's important. And I think in every industry, at Canva, we have all the, product managers. There's all sorts of products that are being launched and all sorts of new features. And as much reading as I can do, sometimes I just need to book a meeting with the person that I'm telling, if it's a new feature that we're rolling out in Docs or a whole new thing like we just launched email, like I need to talk with the PMs to understand exactly what it is, if there's any things that we want to avoid, or what are some of the, some of those like pitfalls, and what are some of the questions that we might be getting. What sorts of things did you do from user testing? Like sometimes the information isn't given to you right off the bat. So sometimes you do have to go chasing to find the information. But there's always going to be a subject matter expert who understands the content. It's about you asking those good questions, just like you would in a training. Like, okay, well, tell me exactly what this looks like, how it looks like, and how we're going to have success. Those are really important questions that we know as teachers. We're really good questioners, really good at getting to that thing. So lean in on those skills as you're learning that process.
Yeah. And like I use the example, and I took pre-calculus in high school, which was a mistake. Or actually, not pre-calculus. I think I took calculus. And
Me
my
too.
teacher was, I mean, you
I
could
loved
tell
it
he was.
actually.
Did you love it? Okay. We had two different experiences. That's great. But you could tell my teacher was a genius. I mean, this guy, like, we used to joke that he like worked for NASA and stuff, like was an agent or whatnot. But like, so I would ask him, like, can you show me how to do this? And he would just bust out the problem, like no problem in 30 seconds. But like he could not help me understand, like bring it down to my language. Like he was such an expert in the content, but I wouldn't say he was an expert in teaching the content. And those are two different things. I think because if you're an expert in something, you think, well, then I can teach it. But that's an entirely different skill. And that's where instructional designers come into play, because you're the expert in how people learn. And so it's just bringing the expertise down to a 101 or beginner level for people so they can grasp, they can understand the concepts.
Yeah, I think that's really good. It's just a really good point. You are the expert in learning, and you are taking those hard to understand compliance, whatever it is,
Yeah.
sorts of, it could be the easiest concept. You still need to make sure that you translate it, because somebody's going to struggle somewhere or not understand it or want more questions or more answers. And it's your job to be able to do that. So I really like that aspect. Okay. So now we're going to switch gears. We talked a lot about instructional design, a lot about your journey,
Yeah.
how you got to where you are, those types of things. I know that you've been building something, probably off the backs of some of your learning that you've done as well, but I'd love for you to chat with us a little bit about your K-12 Impact Academies.
Yeah. So super excited for this. This has been years in the making. And so kind of the first thing we did, it's myself and three other partners. And so part of what we wanted to bring was experience to the table. And so three of us had been former educators, administrators, district leaders. And so we bring like that understanding of EdTech and the K through 12 landscape. But then three of us had been like VPs of sales, trained and led sales teams, client success teams. Like I've done the math, like over like 100 years combined experience in EdTech K through 12. And so like taking that experience and wanting to like, could we build a community where people, whether it's transitioning to educators, whether it's K through 12 companies, individuals in those of whatever level you're at in sales or client success, and build a community to help transform education just from outside the classroom, right? Like you can still make an impact in education. And so a lot of it, like we wanted to be driven by our why. Like we still wanted to make an impact in education. And so we have a free community where, like I said, transitioning teachers, vice president of sales, and EdTech and K through 12 companies can come together and grow. We have free resources, articles, videos, like a growing library of those things. We have discussion boards where you can learn from your peers and collaborate with others. We have free webinars by industry experts, whether, like I said, you're thinking about, client success and EdTech, I'm interested in that, or you're a vice president of sales and you're wanting to pick the brain of a superintendent of how to, find out funding sources, or and then we also have a free course launched for transitioning educators. So that's teachers, administrators, district leaders wanting to figure out, is client success and sales in EdTech and K through 12 where it should be and focus. And a lot of it too, it kind of go back to that conversation of like niching down. Like we're not just sales and client success, we're sales and client success in EdTech and K through 12. So we're very specific. And like we're not, I mean, the reality is then we wouldn't be for everyone, right? Like if, but, and so we could just offer like a client success training in general, or just like a sales training in general. But because selling into and supporting, schools and districts is just so unique, the process of like
So
how they
different.
buy things is very unique, that like our offer would be like, it wouldn't be as powerful, right? So being able to like focus and like harness our experience and really say like, no, this is what we do and this is why we do it. And so, yeah, if you're interested in, sales and client success in the K through 12 and EdTech market, join our free communities.
So tell us a little bit, because I think oftentimes a lot of teachers hear customer success and you're calling it client success, which is totally fine. But tell us a little bit about why you chose to go client success versus customer success.
Yeah. I think just, again, we did a lot of, again, well, I'll first start off in saying like companies call it a variety of different things. I mean, there's so many
Hmm.
terms for
So
for
many
everything.
terms.
Um, and so one, we just wanted to pick one. And so like that's some of the drive. But we've done just over the last year or so, we've done a lot of focus groups with like CEOs and founders of edtech companies, vice presidents of sales and client success, and able to pick their brains. So like we built this first by just listening, and so client success just, we felt it very just professional. Like we didn't want to kind of, customer service or just the idea of customer, like I think has a connotation. So we wanted to kind of bring that idea of like client success. Like these are, again, you're a strategic partner, you're like a trusted advisor. And so kind of want to bring the idea of professionalism as we chose the term. And so, but also realizing, different jobs call different things. And we just saw in the edtech and K through market, like client success tended to be sometimes be the term used. And it's a term we just like, this is what we use and we'll kind of stick with it. But again, that kind of started with just like listening to, whether transition educators, but also doing these focus groups with edtech companies and say, what are you missing in the market? Like, what do you guys need to be supported? And so like, we kind of have two audiences. We have those that are in companies and run companies and train teams. And then we have those that are, educators trying to get into the space.
I think that's great. Yeah. And we've talked offline before this. So I just wanted to make sure that we made that distinction so that everyone understands that client success is customer success. It is
For
very
sure.
similar in nature, just the wording changes. I'm just like sales associate at Canva, we call them district engagement officers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Each team in Canva has a different, like, really cool, like, hip name that no other company would call it. So there's all sorts of like terms and things like that. But I think it's really important to understand that customer success is client success. And I know
Yeah.
that's a huge, I know my audience is always going into client success or customer success or any of those types of things and not necessarily dipping their toes into sales, where I first dipped my toes into sales. So I obviously think that's a big,
Hmm.
I actually think that's a great place to start, but that's just obviously me and my own biases. But it gives you a
Yeah. Yeah.
really great, I think everyone needs to learn how to be a salesperson. So, but I really love that. And I love that what I loved from what you shared is that you've done a lot of iterations, a lot of focus groups, a lot of things to get it to where it is today, hearing from real ed tech companies that are hiring, and then
Yeah.
also understanding what teachers need to be supported in order to make that transition to that field. So it's not just coming from one person creating it, but it's a creative group of more than just, although it is yourself and a couple of others, you've heard feedback from real hiring companies around what they need and what skill sets are often lacking. And then this is the best way to either build that up in an existing company or teachers who are looking to transition into that space.
Yeah, and I think that's huge. Like getting feedback was a piece because we wanted to make sure that what we brought to the market was going to be beneficial. And I mean, that's kind of how we started first offering like just a sales academy for EdTech and K through 12 companies. And the feedback we kept getting was like, do you guys have a client success academy? Because again, like where the market's at is companies are like districts are funding sources are kind of drying up and maybe not signing new contracts, but companies are wanting just to keep, the deals they currently have. And so that's like a big piece. That's kind of where we then built out the Client Success Academy. And then so those are trainings we offer in academies we currently offer. I mean, we've had founders of edtech companies kind of go through just solo by themselves as they're building out their companies. We have entire sales teams going through our training. We've had a couple just when they're onboarding. But then we've taken those two academies, the client success and sales, and we've created a version for educators. And so like taking it and helping educators like bridge the gap between their expertise and like they've been the buyer, right? Like you've sat on one side at the table, whether maybe you've just been a teacher, so you haven't actually been in those conversations, but you've been the user and you've kind of understand that process and how schools work. And but then you need to upskill and understand like how to sell into K through 12 or how to support it as a client success manager. And again, a big piece of this isn't just the transfer of knowledge, but like we really see it as like try to transfer decades of experience to people transitioning into it. And then a big piece of what we do in our academies is like building out a portfolio, which I think in instructional design is like a lot of job listings in instructional design, like it says mandatory for portfolios. And so like I think it's pretty well known in industry, like you need a portfolio when you're applying for one of those jobs. But like when it comes to client success and sales, like it isn't mandatory. And like we're not saying it is, but there's a difference between like you
Really
don't
gives you a
need
leg
it,
up.
but you need it, right? Like, and especially in today's job market where like margins are so slim as like who gets a job and like any
Uh-huh.
opportunity you can have yourself stand out. And I think like again, teachers are trying to jump into edtech because that's like they're like, I have a lot of experience. I understand schools, like I'd be a great fit, but you
Yep.
need portfolio pieces to demonstrate you can do these things. And so a lot of what we do in our academy is build out these portfolios so you can walk into your next interview. Like what if you could demonstrate how you lead a pitch meeting as a sales associate? Or what if you could demonstrate how you lead like an end of year data review meeting as a client success manager? And not just say you can, right? Like, oh, I presented in my classroom for years, but like have like a portfolio piece. And that's some of what we've asked a lot of edtech companies, like, would you find value in this? Like, would this change how you, um, the hiring process? And we've got there's a resounding yes. And so that's kind of what we wanted to bring, not just to companies, but to educators.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm a big advocate for portfolios in general. Anyone I ever
Yeah.
talk to in coffee chats, anything will tell you that. I think even in sales, I think it's really important to have that, especially as a transitioning educator, because the only thing that you have to go off the back of is that you are a, that you sold it to students, which is good. But
Yeah.
if you can have these other aspects of saying, I actually have this way that I can translate it to you in a different way, I think is really important. I think being able to connect with other educators and have other people around you in a safe space is also really important. So, I really appreciate that.
And we say like, because some of it you have an understanding how schools work. Because like, how many times have we've rolled out a new, let's say, I remember we did this new robotics thing, and so like you had like 3 meetings with the people kind of train you how to use this robotics thing in schools, and it was like on Friday, at the end of the week, like pretty tired, and there's a difference between like a client success manager who like comes into that meeting understanding like you've been through the ringer this week, I imagine, as a teacher, versus someone who like doesn't understand education or the industry, and they just like come in. And so that is huge, and that's like a huge thing you bring into these roles in sales and client success, like just understanding like when people are tired, like when people are burnt out, like, but also understanding like the ebbs and flows of the school year, like what teachers and administrators care about. So like that's huge, like even more than, so like you have maybe some sales experience or like some client experience, but you have that just like understanding of the market, which is like because you've lived it, right? And so what we're trying to do is then build off of that and say, how can we bring that perspective to how you sell, how you support schools through like, helping you understand the client journey or like navigating the sales process, and just a lot of terms and ideas that are new, and but also then building those portfolio pieces to share, like, I can demonstrate what I can do, like here's the proof.
Yeah, I just think those are all just so valuable because teachers do have listen, teachers make really good ed tech salespeople because they understand how the tech works inside the schools. And that's what makes them really good customer success and salespeople, in my opinion. So it's great to have that. But sometimes you need the other side. Like, I am sure when you heard the word pitch meeting, if you were
Yeah.
listening to this, you're like, what? I have to do a pitch
Yeah.
meeting? Like, what does that mean? Like, being able to understand what that is and understand what a pitch is and being able to share that, how much more confident would you be walking into an interview? But not only that, you would have this piece of body of work that like you've built and understand the terminology. So really narrowing in, we mentioned this, really narrowing in on that niche and then being able to really make sure that you've upskilled in the right way to get you where you need to go. And something like an academy, talked about all the other ways that you can do upskilling, but
Yeah.
something like this is really going to put you tenfold. And the fact that you've had founders go through it and different things like that, I think it's important to understand that it's been vetted, it's been researched, it's been, iterated on to make sure that it's the best for you. And you guys are about to launch this. Am I right?
Yeah, so we launched the community. Depending on when this video goes live, we're launching the community next week, which is free for anyone. And then we're launching our first cohorts for educators towards the end of this year. 2 cohorts, one for sales and then one for client success. And I think to kind of like, I think a big piece too is like everyone kind of goes into education for different reasons, but like some of it is like, it's never for the money, right? Like you go into it, like it's usually altruistic of like maybe you got into education for the money, but probably not. So I guess it's
Fair
like a
enough.
different transition thing about businesses. Like businesses do operate on this idea of profit, revenue, like margins of, and like your job is really to affect the bottom line. And you can tag it as like corporate greed of like, these companies just want to make money, but the reality is like they couldn't hire you if they didn't make money. And so I say that because like hiring someone's very expensive and risky. And so your job is like when you're applying for a job is to mitigate that risk. So do everything you're impossible where you're bridging the gap between what you can do and what they want you to do, and to show them like, I'm just going to get as close as I can to possibly show you that I can do this job, make it the least risky move you've ever made. And so like your job isn't for them to connect the dots, it's for you to connect the dots for them, which just goes back to the idea of like having a portfolio, and not just having a portfolio, but it's certified, it's been assessed, it's been like, it's been kind of signed off on. And, but again, this idea of like your job looking for jobs is to like mitigate the risk. And so like the hiring manager, like it's a no brainer, and they don't feel like a sense of like, I don't know, because it is risky and expensive to like hire someone. Maybe it doesn't work out. You have to kind of go through the process of like pouring more resources into them, or, letting them go, or whatever that may be. That's just tough. And I just don't think as educators, that's not a world we've lived in. And so it's a new mindset walking into.
Yeah. I just think that's a really, really great viewpoint, being able to like mitigate the risk. And I just know that hiring managers really appreciate that. I know even when you're on the hiring committee, we also really appreciate that you really understand what's going on, and the more body of work that you can speak to, the better, and putting it into those terms, the better. Yeah. So that when somebody does take a risk on you, because it is risk, it's a financial risk to take you on, that it becomes the best risk that they've ever taken.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
okay.
So go ahead. No, go for it.
No, you go.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things we talk about in our free course, like how to use feedback and whatnot. And really in the free course, we actually walk through like how to slow down, like and use kind of personal reflection to like understand what's your why and whatnot. But a big piece, like one thing that just a piece of advice is like use anything as feedback. So like when I wasn't getting any bites, partly because I was applying to all remote jobs, and like so was everyone else in the world. And so like I started applying, but I knew my resume was good because I had it, vetted. I knew my portfolio was good because I had it vetted. So I started applying to hybrid jobs, and that just changed. And so I think a big piece is, rather than, again, I've said it before, like point the finger outside and say it's the hiring process, or like go on, like I don't advise going on LinkedIn as blasting hiring managers. That's not a great way to build your professional brand, or just talking, and like the problems out there, again, just saying what do I have control over and what can I change? And so like for me, that was a game changer. Like the moment I went from hybrid jobs, I was like a small fish in a big ocean versus a small fish in a small pond. And I like started getting calls back. Like I had four job offers like in 2 months. And so it just changed because like, again, my resume, like the chance I was 1 of 600, I used to tell my wife, like, that's like impossible. But like 1 in 60, well, there's a chance that I'm the top there, So again, I think just using anything and everything, even silence as feedback, because if you were the best candidate, they would hire you, right? Like they're not somehow out to get you. So either you are and they just can't see that. And so you have to change how you present yourself, or you're not, and you have to kind of upskill and become the best candidate.
Yeah. 2 things that you said there was changing from just being remote only to being hybrid. I think as teachers, you've been traveling 5 days into the office for your whole career. So changing something to hybrid, and even looking local, like you're at UC San Diego, like you looking local, can really put a leg up, because you go from 1 in 600, which is often what a candidate pool will look like, to something remote, to 1 in 60. That's a way better chance of getting there. And, you have the best resume, that sort of thing. So you're probably going to get more bites. So that was going to be my next question, is if you have any tips and tricks for teachers who, to wrap up today's interview, for teachers making the transition. So I heard what you said. It's that feedback piece, making sure that you hear that feedback, looking and adjusting your hybrid, kind of adjusting where you're looking and not just solely being remote only all the time. And then are there any other tips or tricks that you would leave for our teacher transitioners?
Yeah. I mean, I think just the idea of like, use everything as feedback, even silence as feedback of like, okay, what can I do differently? And then that kind of leaves you on the trail of like, is it my resume? Like you kind of go through the list, like which it is. And so again, I think just that idea of like pointing the finger, not outside, or like another tip is, you said it in, I think, your previous video, but just idea like LinkedIn's not necessarily where you should go to like just badmouth hiring managers or talk about how you're frustrated with the process. Like, I think there is a sense of being vulnerable helps like you articulate like who you are. And so, but I just would be weary of doing that on LinkedIn. And I just don't think that's the place. I think that's a place for you to do that in your group chat with your friends, right? but not on LinkedIn. And so I think seeing that as like, you're also telling your story, not just on your resume, but like LinkedIn is as much your resume as the paper you turn in that you call your resume. And so like, I think that's a huge thing, how you present yourself. But I think it goes back to like, again, maybe hiring managers are out to get you and they've singled you out and said, we're never going to hire this person. But you just have to look at yourself and say, like, you can only control what you can control and like fix those things and kind of go through the list. And again, it's just that iteration. I think too, like another piece of advice, if you go into interviews, try to suss out like what they value in a candidate. And so the job I currently got, I realized like they valued my experience and they wanted someone experienced, but they really valued a culture fit. And so I realized like when I was going through interviews, like that's the main thing I was trying to convince them of, is like that I was a fit with their culture. And so versus like me just kind of like talking about how awesome I was, which, you know, you do in interviews, but like understand. So use questions to like understand, try to figure out like what they value, and then like double down on that and like show how you match with those values. Like I think that's huge. But yeah, use feedback. And I said it in the beginning, but like slowing down is huge. And yeah, we cover all this stuff in our free course, and of just like taking time to figure out why you want to do what you want to do, not just rush into what you want to do. Because it's, you know, like you'll be more like, because if you just focus on what, then you're going to move from teaching that maybe you don't like to something else that you don't like. And again, the one thing that can be consistent is like your values and what you care about and your why. So
I could not agree more. And I appreciate that. And I obviously believe that your resume and LinkedIn should match. They should always match. LinkedIn should not be your sounding off board. It's not the right place. Even a LinkedIn group, if it's public, be really careful because it's also searchable. But yes, group chat, small friends that you've met in cohorts, those types of things, those are perfect places to vent and share all of your I think being strategic anywhere you can on LinkedIn, because it's professional, is really important. But what I liked most is the feedback. Feedback is golden, and silence is golden. That means if you're hearing silence and if you applied to 100 jobs and you didn't hear anything, it's you.
Yeah.
Meaning it's not you specifically, like you as a person. It's your assets that you've given over, your resume, those sorts of things. They're not speaking to culture fit, which is important that you said. They're also not fitting to the skill set for the job. So you need to get it tweaked. And once your resume is tweaked and ready to go, you should be getting some sort of callbacks for hiring managers, more likely than not. And then you didn't mention this, but I will, practicing. It's really important for you to practice. You were just saying, suss out questions, which having questions prepared is huge, but also practicing. Literally sit in front of yourself, in front of Zoom or some kind of something, I don't know, QuickTime, whatever it is, and record yourself. Like you can chat GPT questions. It doesn't matter if they're right questions or wrong questions for like what someone would do in ID, and look at yourself and make sure that you're understanding what the question is. And did you answer it? Did you get that sort of feedback? I think those are really good tips.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will share all of the information for these academies below, and we'll make sure that we tag them in postings, that sort of thing. Tommy, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your insights with our listeners. And I feel like they've probably walked away with really a lot of great information today.
No, I'm happy. I just remember how it felt transitioning. I felt stuck and, it's frustrating. So yeah, I mean, I hope this was helpful to at least one person, and yeah, happy to connect on LinkedIn with anyone. And yeah, thanks for the conversation.
Amazing. Well, you heard it here. I was just about to ask, how can people find you? So on LinkedIn. So we'll make sure that's also down in the show notes as well.
That's great.
And as always, we will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. You've made it this far. We are so thankful that you're here. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, comment below, and join us for all of our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us as we disrupt education together. See you guys soon. Bye, everybody.